Welcome to Beit Yahweh. We're busy fighting for the truth of our Lord Yahushua the Mashiach. Not that he needs us to fight for him, but we are commissioned, we are called, we are sent to speak. Now, your website is called The Thinking Atheist. You put out these videos, and so I thought it might be appropriate to look at a little bit of thinking from this book, Let the People Think, Bertrand Russell. Now, one assumption which you seem to have behind your videos is that somehow there's a contradiction, and somehow because bad things happen and little miracles or little things which people think are miracles are happening, somehow that means it's against the existence of God. Now, in other words, you're trying to put a kind of dichotomy between these two things as if they're mutually exclusive somehow. Now, obviously, as a believer, I know Yahweh controls everything. He may produce a little miracle picture over here, but he also controls life and death. Amen. Yahweh raised Jesus from the dead, showing us that there is hope of the future. Now, since you've called yourself the Thinking Atheist, I thought we would look at Bertrand Russell's Let the People Think. And look at one of your creeds, I guess, is science. Naturalists tend to think that they have somehow got the field on science. Somehow it's atheists who created the science thing. No. It was believers who did it first. But the science thing is not the most rational thing. And this is what the question raised by Bertrand Russell here is science superstitious? Let's have a look at what Bertrand has to say on this matter. Modern life is built on science in two respects. On the one hand, we all depend upon scientific inventions and discoveries for our daily bread and for our comforts and amusements. On the other hand, certain habits of mind connected with a scientific outlook have spread gradually during the past 3 centuries, from a few men of genius to large sections of the population. These two operations of science are bound up together when we consider sufficiently long periods, but either might exist without the other for several centuries. Until near the end of the 18th century, the scientific habit of mind did not greatly affect daily life, since it had not led to the great inventions that revolutionized industrial technique. On the other hand, the manner of life produced by science can be taken over by populations which have only certain practical rudiments of scientific knowledge. Such populations can make and utilize machines invented elsewhere, and can even make minor improvements in them. If the collective intelligence of mankind were to degenerate, the kind of technique and daily life which science has produced would nevertheless survive, in all probability for many generations, but it would not survive forever, because if seriously disturbed by a cataclysm, it could not be reconstructed. The scientific outlook, therefore, is a matter of importance to mankind, either for good or evil. But the scientific outlook itself is twofold. Like the artistic outlook, the creator and the appreciator are different people and require quite different habits of mind. The scientific creator, like every other, is apt to be inspired by passions to which he gives an intellectualist expression amounting to an undemonstrated faith. What is he saying here? What is this man saying? He's saying science is a product of faith. Hear that. Without which he would probably achieve little. Remember, it was our Lord Jesus Christ who said, if you have faith, you can move mountains. The faith of a mustard seed. The appreciator does not need this kind of faith. He can see things in proportion and make necessary reservations, and may regard the creator as a crude and barbaric person in comparison with himself. As civilization becomes more diffused and more traditional, there is a tendency for habits of mind of the appreciator to conquer those who might be creators, with the result that civilization in question becomes Byzantine and retrospective. Something of this sort seems to be beginning to happen in science. The simple faith which upheld the pioneers is decaying at the center. Outlying nations, such as the Russians, the Japanese, and the young Chinese, still welcome science with 17th century fervor. So do the bulk of the populations of the Western nations. But the high priests begin to weary of the worship to which they are officially dedicated. The pious young Luther reverenced a free-thinking pope who allowed oxen to be sacrificed to Jupiter on the Capitol to promote his recovery from illness. So in our day, those remote from centers of culture have a reverence for science which its augurs no longer feel. The scientific materialism of the Bolsheviks, like early German Protestantism, is an attempt to preserve the old piety in a form which both friends and foes believe to be new. But their fiery belief in the verbal inspiration of Newton has only accelerated the spread of scientific skepticism among the bourgeois scientists of the West. Science as an activity recognized and encouraged by the state has become politically conservative, except where, as in Tennessee, the state has remained pre-scientific. The fundamental faith of most men of science in the present day is not in the importance of preserving the status quo. Consequently, they are willing to claim for science no more than its due and to concede much of the claims of other conservative forces such as religion. They are faced, however, with a great difficulty. While the men of science are in the main conservative, science is still the chief agent of rapid change in the world. The emotions produced by the change in Asia, in Africa, and among the industrial populations of Europe are often displeasing to those who have a conservative outlook. Hence arises a hesitation as to the value of science, which has contributed to the skepticism of the high priests. If it stood alone, it might be unimportant, but it is reinforced by genuine intellectual difficulties which, if they prove insuperable, are likely to bring the era of scientific discovery to a close. I do not mean that this will happen suddenly. Russia and Asia may continue for another century to entertain the scientific faith which the West is losing. But sooner or later, if the logical case against this faith is irrefutable, it will convince men who for whatever reason may be momentarily weary, and once convinced, they will find it impossible to recapture the old glad confidence. The case against the scientific credo deserves therefore to be examined with all care. When I speak of the scientific credo, I am not speaking merely of what is logically implied in the view that in the main science is true. I am speaking of something more enthusiastic and less rational, namely the system of beliefs and emotions which lead a man to become a great scientific discoverer. The question is, can such beliefs and emotions survive among men who have the intellectual powers without which scientific discovery is impossible? Two very interesting recent books which help us to see the nature of the problem. The books I mean are Burt's Metaphysical Foundations of Modern Science, 1924, and Whitehead's Science and the Modern Man, 1920, and the Modern World, 1926. Each of these criticizes the system of ideas which the modern world owes to Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and Newton, the former almost wholly from a historical standpoint, the latter both historically and logically. Dr. Whitehead's book is the more important because it is not merely critical but constructive, and aims at supplying an intellectually satisfying basis for future science, which is to be at the same time emotionally satisfying to the extra scientific aspirations of mankind. I cannot accept the logical arguments advanced by Dr. Whitehead in favor of what may be called the pleasant parts of his theory. While admitting the need of an intellectual reconstruction of scientific concepts, I incline to the view that the new concepts will be just as disagreeable to our non-intellectual emotions as the old ones, and will therefore be accepted only by those who have a strong emotional bias in favor of science. But let us see what the argument is. There is to begin with the historical aspect. Quote, "There can be no living science," says Dr. Whitehead, "unless there is a widespread instinctive conviction in the existence of an order of things, and in particular of an order of nature. Science could only have been created by men who already had this belief, and therefore the original sources of the belief must have been pre-scientific. Other elements also went to make up the complex mentality required for the rise of science. The Greek view of life, he maintains, was predominating predominantly dramatic and therefore tended to